They said predators didn't feel fear. Every xenobiologist on record agreed apex species had no use for it. Fear was for prey. Fear was for the weak. That's what the textbook said. That's what the alien medics believed, right up until one was dragged into their infirmary, bleeding and snarling, and no one dared go near it. Then, a human walked in. No armor, no shield field, just a man with calm eyes and blood on his sleeves, looking at a monster the way you'd look at an injured dog. And when everyone else backed away, he knelt beside it and whispered, "It's not angry, it's afraid." The distress signal reached Andara Moonbase Medical Command at 2,347 local rotation. 12 seconds later, the outer landing pad lit up with emergency strobes as the first wave of casualties from cargo vessel TEV Delphi came in on auto-guided gurneys, some conscious, most not. The crash had taken out the dorsal engine, shredded the hull across rows 5 through 12, and depressurized the cargo deck. Survivors were in shock. Pilots, soldiers, crew techs, it didn't matter. Everyone was bleeding or burned or crushed or half-conscious under layers of soot and frost. But that wasn't what made the medbay fall silent. That came when a second carrier drone touched down, hauling a magnetic containment pod just under 4 meters long and nearly 2 wide. It hissed as it powered down, inner lights glowing crimson through the armored viewing slit. Inside, something moved. Autoloader malfunctioned in the crash. The attending drone reported over the comms. Cargo broke containment. Paramedics kept it sedated with 50 cc's of crystalline oxytran, but it wore off en route. Subject is now fully conscious. The lights dimmed. The pod's outer locks disengaged with a harsh mechanical thunk. Nobody moved. Even the monitors quieted, as though the room itself had gone cold. Dr. Kelvor, of the Maratian Medical Guild, was the first to speak. His voice was thin, dry. "It's a Scarth Rend." He stepped back without realizing. That's a Scarth Rend. Another medic cursed in Shintari, backing into a tray stand. Several instruments clattered to the floor. 6 limbs, tri-segmented torso. The hide, usually dark bronze, was slicked with dark blue blood and ripped open along its flank. Massive jaws bristled with teeth, evolved to crush through mineral armor. The eyes, too large, too smaller, pulsed with liquid amber as they scanned the room. Its respiration was rapid, irregular. The biomonitors screamed with overlapping data. Pain levels maxed, stress hormones spiked, rage pheromones leaking from damaged glands along the shoulders. Kelvor turned, voice shrill. "Containment only, no contact. Euthanize before it breaches." "Doctor," one of the orderlies whispered, "it's already restrained." "Not enough. That harness is standard spec. That thing could break it in under 30 seconds. You can smell it, it's enraged." And they could. The musk of territorial fury, pungent and oily, spread like fire through the air vents. Half the nurses closest to the pod were already gone, abandoning stretchers and data pads mid-readout. Kelvor stood frozen, limbs twitching, his second heart knocking against his thoracic ridge. Predators that big don't tolerate trauma. It will thrash until it rips itself apart, or someone else. A technician tried to activate the sedation field again, but the biofeedback loop rejected the command. The creature's neural pattern was scrambled. "Hostile and unstable," Kelvor said, fumbling for the door lock override. "We don't have time for—" The door hissed open. A human stepped in. The silence turned to pressure. Dr. Elias Ward didn't move like the other species. He didn't freeze. He didn't flinch. He just walked, slow and steady, like he'd done it 100 times before, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, gloves in one hand, med scanner in the other. His jacket had a line of dried blood down the front. One boot dragged slightly. "Status?" he asked, his voice low but clear. Kelvor didn't answer right away. When he finally found words, they were half-breathless. "Unstable. The subject is hostile and—" "It's not hostile," Elias said, stepping closer to the pod. He didn't look at Kelvor. He looked at the creature specifically, at the way its ribs lifted and fell in erratic spasms. Its legs were twitching, claws scraping the floor just millimeters away from the restraint's breaking point. Look at the breathing pattern, shallow, rapid. And the pupils see that? They're not locked on target. That's not predatory focus. That's panic. Kelvor turned rigid. You're saying it's scared? I'm saying it's afraid, Elias replied. The staff stared. The Scarthrend let out a low, rasping growl and jerked its body against the harness. One of the metal joints shrieked under the strain. Several medics recoiled. It wasn't a bluff. The beast was strong enough to snap reinforced alloy. Kelvor moved toward the panic switch. We need containment foam, now. But Elias stepped forward. 1 meter from the pod. The creature's head snapped toward him, every muscle coiled, every tooth bared. And the human knelt. Just outside its reach, Elias crouched down, the scanner quiet at his side. His voice dropped to a near whisper. I know that sound, he said. That's pain, pretending to be fury. The Scarthrend snarled. A bloody string of saliva hissed against the pod's floor. One of its claws flexed until it bent the steel ring beneath it. Step back, Kelvor shouted. You're provoking it. Elias didn't move. If I was provoking it, he said calmly, I'd already be dead. Then he said the words that no one in the entire medbay, maybe the entire moonbase, expected to hear. Lower the field. The nurse next to the console blinked at him. You mean, drop the containment field. Now. That's suicide, Kelvor hissed. We'll be filing your obituary with a sponge. But Elias was already reaching for his gloves. Not if I'm right. The technician hesitated. She looked at Kelvor. Kelvor refused to authorize it. Elias didn't wait. He crossed to the panel himself and keyed in the override using his emergency medical clearance. The station's system paused, then beeped its compliance. With a sigh of static and a buzz of falling current, the shimmer of containment around the pod vanished. The room held its breath. The Scarthrend twisted toward the new silence, limbs rising. Its mouth opened, exposing 2 rows of glistening teeth. The scent of blood thickened. And Elias moved. Slow, not in a straight line. He curved around the pod's edge, never making direct eye contact. His gloved hands were visible, open, unarmed. Easy, he said. No one's here to hurt you. You're in pain. That's all. We're going to help you. The creature's hind legs spasmed, its body tensed. But it didn't attack. Instead, it made a sound no one in the room had ever heard, from a Scarthrend. A low, confused chuff, the kind a wounded animal might make when it isn't sure if it's safe or dying. Elias crouched beside the torn flank. The wound was ragged, too deep for dermal foam, already leaking fluid into the pod's inner lining. He reached for a med patch. The Scarthrend's eyes locked onto his hand. You mind if I touch this? He asked softly. I won't make it worse. The room's monitors ticked out warnings. Oxygen levels unstable, cardiac irregularity, adrenal spikes. Then something changed. The creature's breathing slowed. Its muscles twitched but didn't flex. The heart rate dropped, stabilizing in half beats. One monitor lit green. Kelvor stared at it. That's impossible. Elias pressed the regenerative patch to the exposed tissue. It hissed once, bonding with the flesh, and the Scarthrend flinched but didn't strike. It exhaled sharply, flanks shuddering. Pain means you're alive, Elias murmured, and alive means you can heal. The second heart rhythm normalized. Blood flow decreased to a sustainable level. Tissue oxygenation climbed. The Scarthrend blinked. Its jaws parted slightly, no growl this time. And then, without any sedation, it slumped down onto the pod's floor and went still. Asleep. Kelvor's voice was barely audible. How did you do that? Elias sat back, peeling off one glove. His hands were shaking now. I didn't calm it, he said. I just treated it the way you'd want to be treated if you were bleeding and terrified. Kelvor stared. But it's a predator. Elias looked up at him, eyes tired. So are we, he said. We just learn not to show our teeth unless we have to. For the next hour, the medbay returned to triage. It wasn't calm. It never was after a crash. But the shrieking alarms quieted to manageable levels, and stretchers started moving again. Whatever storm had passed with the Scarthrend's sedation left behind an uneasy stillness, like the moment after a quake where people start checking if the walls are still standing. Elias didn't leave the pod. He sat cross-legged just outside the inner arc of the Scarthrend's reach, rubbing his left shoulder, occasionally dislocated 3 months back during a medevac drop on Karis 2. No one spoke to him directly. The other medics avoided his side of the room, the way you'd avoid a nest of volatile explosives, even though the creature hadn't moved since losing consciousness. The regenerative patch adhered well. The gash along the beast's side had stabilized, though it would need surgical support within the next 4 hours to prevent tissue collapse. Biofoam would have been faster, but Scarth Wren tissue didn't tolerate it. Their immune system treated synthetic sealants like parasitic invaders. Elias had seen one chew its own leg off, trying to dig out a mistimed implant. He didn't mention that. Instead, he sat and watched the chest rise and fall slow now, like waves instead of storms. Behind him, Kelvor hovered near the central console, reading the vitals for the 8th time. Its adrenaline curve began to drop within 15 seconds of your voice entering the pod, he said, not bothering to mask his disbelief. No neural sedation, no chemical input, just vocal cadence. Some species sync with rhythmic patterns, Elias replied, standing up carefully. It's a mammalian holdover, infant mother bonding through auditory familiarity. Kelvor adjusted the display. But you didn't speak in its language. I didn't need to. The alien narrowed his eyes. You're telling me it responded to tone? Elias nodded once. Heartbeat rhythm, subconscious pacing, not the words the way they were spoken. It's older than language. Kelvor's gill ridges darkened with tension. That still doesn't explain why it didn't attack you. Every other recorded encounter with Scarthrend in a compromised state ends the same way: death or full immobilization. Elias flexed his shoulder again, checking for pain. Because everyone treats it like a monster. And monsters don't need help, they need control. That earned a pause. Kelvor scrolled back through the sensor logs, then froze at a spike in neural activity. He tapped it, voice shifting toward awe. The moment your hand touched the wound, its prefrontal node lit up. That's the empathy cluster. Elias glanced over. Meaning? Meaning it recognized intent. The alien turned, eyes unblinking. It understood you were trying to help. Elias didn't answer right away. He just stared through the pod glass again, the slow rise and fall of the creature's ribcage reflected in his eyes. It didn't want to kill anyone, he said eventually. It just didn't know what else to do. By early second cycle, Base Command sent a delegation. Not medical personnel security. Lieutenant Commander Juno Whalen arrived with a 3-man escort, pulse carbines slung at ease but powered, their retinas scanning every surface for movement. They made no effort to speak softly when they entered. Is it still alive? Whalen asked, already moving toward the pod. Stable, Kelvor answered tightly, though I question the necessity of bringing armed forces into a healing environment. Whalen didn't respond. She studied the pod like it might detonate. That thing took out 4 Marines before we got it off the wreck, snapped one in half, bit through exoplate like tissue paper. Elias stood beside the pod. It was injured and cornered. You would have done the same. Whalen turned to him. Are you defending it? I'm treating it. There was a flicker of something in her expression. Not anger, familiarity. You've worked with them before. 1 years ago. Wildlife Recovery Unit on Novar's moon. Young male, impaled on landing struts from a freight rig. And? He died, Elias said, but not before he stopped trying to kill me. That quieted the room again, not because of the words, but the way he said them. No drama, just fact. A worn-out memory wrapped in bandages of time. Whalen's eyes flicked back to the pod. I want it off my base before shift turnover. If it wakes up again, I want the nearest bulkhead between it and the crew. I'll prep it for transfer, Elias said, but I'll need to stay with it during sedation, alone. Kelvor turned toward him in alarm. That's not standard procedure. No, Whalen cut in, but apparently nothing is with this damn thing. Let him do it. I don't want it tearing another surgical wing apart if it panics again. She left without waiting for acknowledgement. Her team followed. Inside the monitoring suite, Kelvor finally spoke. You humans are insane, he said quietly. Elias didn't disagree. He leaned over the console and called up the most recent scan. The data looped again, clean and sharp. The beast's endocrine levels had started to drop before Elias had spoken. The first change was at visual contact. Do you see this? Elias said, tapping a highlighted segment. Right when I walked in, it clocked me. That's recognition. Kelvor glanced over, confused. You're saying it knows you? No, I'm saying it knows what I am. Kelvor exhaled hard through his nostrils. Impossible. Maybe not. Elias brought up archived scans of terrestrial wolves, then overlapped a Scarthren's cortical structure. There were no exact matches, but the limbic map, the way threat signals were interpreted, showed startling parallels. They use cooperative hunting, Elias said. Pack formations, complex emotional cues, not hierarchical, not like raptors, more like old Earth canines, but bigger, scarier. Kelvor peered at the data. So, when you approached it, I didn't act like a threat. I didn't act like prey. I acted like a member of the group trying to help it back up. And that worked because it remembered? No, Elias said, because empathy isn't language, it's pattern, and pattern recognition is universal. Kelvor stepped back from the console. This changes things. Elias looked at him. That's what scares you most, isn't it? The alien's throat sac twitched. Predators don't ask for help. They don't have to, Elias said softly. They just have to survive long enough for someone to offer it. The prep for transfer started 3 hours later. Medical Transport Vesper was rerouted from a supply run to bring a reinforced stasis tank with manual override. Only one person was authorized to operate it from the inside. Elias signed the clearance himself. The Scarthrend was still unconscious. The vitals were stable, but low enough to move, not enough to wake. Elias checked the patch twice. Then he checked the bone density scan. 3 fractured ribs. Possible organ bruising. He noted the hematoma near the lower spine and requested 2 units of clotting plasma and 1 of synthetic glucose. A nurse started to argue protocol. Elias handed her the readout. She stopped talking. The transfer required 6 staff members. Elias didn't allow anyone to touch the beast directly. All support came through pressure pads and motor assist brackets. When the Scarthrend was finally secure in the new pod, Elias sat beside it on the floor, one hand resting lightly on the containment glass. Then the unexpected happened. The creature stirred. Not violently, not in distress. It simply blinked. Once, slowly. Elias didn't speak. He didn't move his hand. But the vitals didn't spike. The respiration didn't spike. The monitors held green. Kelvor stood in the doorway, watching. Your species, he said after a moment. You don't just survive danger. You talk to it. Elias let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. You'd be surprised what listens when you stop shouting. The pod sealed. The transport lifted off 2 minutes later, taking the creature back to a deep research center in orbit. Elias didn't go with it. He'd already made his decision. His job had ended the moment the Scarthrend let him touch the wound. Kelvor remained behind too. He stood at the edge of the landing pad, looking at the stars as if they might hold answers he hadn't thought to ask. Back inside, the medbay resumed its routines. But the image stayed. A man kneeling beside a wounded beast, not subduing it, not conquering it, just understanding it. The medbay was quieter now. Not peaceful. That was never the right word for a place where lungs were stitched back together and nerve clusters rebooted like failing software, but quieter. The crash casualties were either stabilized or transferred. The alarms had gone from constant to occasional, like coughs in a once-sick room. But no one had quite relaxed. Even with the Scarthrend gone, its presence lingered not like a ghost, but like something that had challenged a core assumption and left a permanent fracture behind. Medics whispered in corners. Security tripled containment drills, and Kelvor, head of xenobiological trauma, couldn't stop watching the data logs over and over, as though a hidden variable might appear if he stared long enough. He didn't believe in anomalies. He believed in things missed. At 0411, the Orbital Research Lab Meridian Theta sent back its first full neural scan from the Scarthrend. It arrived encoded with 2 encryption layers and a request for interpretation. The file landed on Elias's terminal. He didn't have to decrypt it. His clearance bypassed the formalities, but he waited anyway, letting his tea steep for another full minute before breaking the seal. The first image was a waveform. Non-standard, dense with overlapping clusters, like a choir recorded underwater. Elias frowned. leaned in. He adjusted the depth layers. Behind the confusion, there was rhythm. Not a language, not data, a pulse. The log included timestamps from the creature's time on Andara. It matched his presence to the fluctuations in the Scarth Wren's limbic responses. Kelvor came in just as Elias was replaying the synced feed. "You're still here," the alien said. Elias didn't turn. "So are you." Kelvor moved beside him and looked at the graph. "I've seen this pattern in 2 places before: newborn Tralix hatchlings during nesting separation, and once in a Naris predator when its mate was killed during a migration." Elias folded his arms. "Grief." Kelvor didn't nod, but the implication stood. "But that doesn't make sense here. This creature had no attachment to anyone on board the transport." "Not grief for a specific bond," Elias said, "but maybe for something more instinctual." "Like what?" "Abandonment." Kelvor hesitated. "You think it was cargo?" "I think it was stolen. Maybe from its territory, maybe from its pack. Maybe it was meant to be a trophy, or studied, or sold." Kelvor frowned. There was no record of its presence on the manifest. "That's the point. Someone tried to hide it." They stared at the display in silence. The scan had continued recording after the pod left Andara. At 22 minutes into transit, the Scarth Wren stirred again. The monitors spiked briefly, then faded. Elias froze the frame. Its eyes, all 4, were open. The next file showed the stasis pod. From inside, the beast wasn't restrained, it wasn't sedated either. It was simply lying still, eyes fixed on the place where Elias's hand had rested earlier. And for the next 7 minutes, it didn't move. Not sleep, not unconsciousness, stillness. Not fear. Something else. The following morning, Command requested a debrief from all med personnel involved in the incident. Protocol, they called it. But Elias knew better. He stood in front of the table, facing 4 brass badges and 10 suspicious eyes. "You approached a dangerous, injured predator without containment, sedation, or authorization," one of the administrators said. "Why?" Elias replied simply, "Because the alternatives were worse. You endangered the entire medbay. No one else was hurt. You could have been killed." "Yes," Elias said, "I know." There was a pause, a long one. Then another voice, older, quieter. "You knew what it was, but not how it would react." Elias met the gaze. "I knew what it needed." "And how exactly did you know that, Doctor?" He was quiet for a second. Then, finally, "Because I've been that creature, alone, bleeding, scared, and treated like a threat because I didn't have the words to ask for help." No one spoke after that. The questioning ended 5 minutes later. He was cleared of violation under emergency provisions. On his way out, one of the observers, a medical ethics officer, followed him into the corridor. "Your file says you served on Delta 3, she said. "The plague zone." "I did." "You were the only survivor from your unit." "Yep." "And you still trust things like that?" Elias looked at her. "It's not about trust," he said. "It's about not assuming everything unfamiliar is dangerous." She didn't answer. He walked away without waiting for one. That evening, the orbital team sent a priority ping. Elias read it twice before forwarding it to Kelvor. The Scarth Wren had refused full sedation for transfer into long-term research care. It thrashed, howled, and braced itself in corners, causing minor fractures in the pod frame until the sedation protocol was cancelled. Vitals returned to stable levels immediately. A second attempt failed, then a third. The researchers prepared for cryosuspension as a last resort. But before they engaged the protocol, someone left a comms mic open, audio only. Background chatter from the prep team. The Scarth Wren stilled. Heart rate dropped. Stress chemicals subsided. It moved toward the speaker. The mic was replaying an old message recorded from Andara base. A security update featuring background sound from the med bay, including Elias's voice. When Elias returned to the observation deck the next morning, Kelvor was already there. He looked like he hadn't slept, or perhaps hadn't stopped thinking. "It remembered you," Kelvor said without turning. "No," Elias said. "It remembered feeling safe." The alien watched the stars. "I reviewed its blood scans again. And there's an unidentified protein compound in the plasma. It's neural reactive. I think it bonds to ambient pheromones and creates an emotional imprint. Elias leaned beside him. You're saying it chemically encodes emotional memory? Only under extreme stress. It's never been documented in a sentient predator. What does that mean for us? Kelvor looked at him now. It means when you walked in, it didn't just see you. Elias waited. It marked you, biologically. Elias blinked. So now what? Kelvor looked down. Now we either learn from that, or we go back to treating everything with teeth like it's a weapon waiting to go off. Elias pushed off from the rail. We've done that long enough. The alien hesitated. Elias, you're not afraid of it? I am, he said honestly, but I'm more afraid of what happens if we never listen to anything that scares us. That night, the stars over Andara seemed closer than usual. And in the deep orbit above, something enormous lay quiet in a pod filled with red light, listening to echoes from a world where one voice had spoken not in commands, not in warnings, but in the quiet, steady rhythm of understanding, not dominance, not control, just empathy. And it remembered. The call came just after third cycle. Not from Meridian Theta or the Central Medical Chain, but from a research vessel just outside the Thorn Corridor, a science craft called Kestrel Array, Deep Space Registry, with no business being near a predator transport route. Their message was short, clipped, and slightly panicked. Unidentified biosignal in Containment Bay. Responding to Scarthren resonance. We need a Xenovet, preferably the one from Andara base. They meant Elias. He arrived within 9 hours on a borrowed scout courier. The ship was small enough to thread suborbit corridors without traffic clearance and fast enough to bypass command entirely. He didn't bring a team. He didn't have time to explain. The Kestrel looked like 100 other research rigs, utilitarian, gray, scarred from micrometeorites and budget cuts. Its crew met him at the hangar, visibly tense. Not because of him, but because of what was waiting in their lower bay. I thought we were dealing with one predator, said the ship's bio-ops chief, a gaunt woman named Erin Cho. Turns out, we've got two. Elias frowned. Explain. We picked up a faint distress ping, non-verbal, harmonic-based. It didn't match any of the beacon types we know. Followed it to a derelict hauler caught in a debris net. Inside, we found a juvenile Scarthrend, barely alive. Elias froze. Juvenile? Roughly a third the size of the adult. Severe malnourishment. Partially sedated. Someone tried to transport it in a broken cryopod. Judging by the markings, it was taken from the same region as the one you treated. Elias followed her to the lower deck. The lights here were dimmer, deliberately muffled to reduce stress triggers. But he could already feel the charge in the air, not static, not fear, something else. The new Scarthrend was smaller, gaunt, with one malformed limb and heavy scarring along its dorsal plate. Its eyes were clearer, though, alert, tracking movement with sharp jerks. It didn't growl when it saw Elias. It just watched. Aaron pulled up the logs. It's been aggressive, with everyone else shredded 3 drones and damaged a SED unit. But the moment it detected the adult scent on your clothes, it went still. Then it started mimicking vocalizations. Mimicking? She played a clip, low sound, almost mechanical, but beneath the garble was a patterned cadence, pauses, breath rhythm. It was copying Elias. Not the words, just the rhythm. Has it vocalized anything else? Nothing distinct. But every time we played the Andara audio logs your encounter, it moved closer to the speaker. We think it's imprinting. Elias didn't answer. Not out loud. He approached the containment glass, slowly. The juvenile tracked him. Its body posture shifted, not lowering, not relaxing, but repositioning, as if expecting communication. He sat down in front of the pod, cross-legged like before. This time there was no sedated calm, no faint light or drugged stillness, just the stare of something that had survived too long in too small a space. You weren't supposed to be found, were you? He said quietly. Left to drift until you stopped making noise. The juvenile let out a short, sharp bark. Not a threat. More like acknowledgement. Elias didn't blink. Who did this to you? The answer came faster than expected. Less than 2 days later, Meridian Theta reported a breach. Not an accident. A data theft. Internal. The research logs from the adult Scarth Rend had been cloned. Not just vitals, genetic markers, including the protein sequences Kelvor had identified. Elias and Aaron sat in the Kestrel's main lab, watching the security feed. A technician, low clearance, clean record, quiet, had accessed the neural files without authorization and transferred them via microburst packet to an unlisted relay. When security traced the bounce back, it vanished into a black channel inside Dominion trade routes. Black market. Elias pushed away from the console. Someone's trying to replicate the emotional bonding sequence. Aaron looked at him. Weaponize it? Or control it? Kelvor, who had joined them via holo feed, hissed low. You think this was all intentional? The crash, the missing manifest, the juvenile? Elias stood. I think someone's been capturing apex predators and testing how far you can manipulate them without sedation. The adult bonded with me. That data got out. Now someone wants to see if they can force that bond artificially. Aaron blinked. Why? Because if you can engineer a Scarth Rend to choose you, to obey you. Kelvor finished the thought. Then you've got the most intelligent bioweapon in the quadrant. Elias returned to the juvenile's chamber alone. He'd changed into the same jacket he'd worn on Andara. The bloodstain on the sleeve was still faintly visible, though faded from repeated cleaning. He'd left it deliberately, not as a statement, but a signal. The young Scarth Rend noticed immediately. Its head tilted, its claws flexed. It stepped closer to the barrier, sniffed once, then made a deep, rolling sound low in its throat. Not a growl. A query. Elias lowered himself again. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a sealed pouch emergency protein concentrate designed for post-trauma patients. He didn't offer it. He simply placed it on the floor in front of the pod, hands open, palms up. The juvenile watched him. Then it did something unexpected. It sat down. Not submissive, not relaxed. Just mirrored. It mimicked his posture, its malformed forelimb bracing as best it could, and sat. Elias exhaled once, very slowly. They called you a beast, he said. Taught everyone to fear you. The creature blinked. But beasts don't mourn. Beasts don't remember kindness. It lowered its head. You're not a weapon. You're just a child that was stolen from your pack. The room went still. The juvenile rose again, not aggressive, deliberate. It stepped forward, pressed one claw gently against the glass, and held it there. Elias hesitated, then placed his palm on the opposite side. No threat. No anger. Just two creatures who had survived too long without being understood. Later that night, Aaron found him in the lab, reviewing pulse data. She brought a protein bar and a medical update, another cracked rib from the Scarth Rend, likely from before they found it. We can stabilize it, she said, but it'll need a slow recovery. 4 to 6 weeks minimum. That limb isn't going to fix itself either. Reconstructive surgery? If it survives the anesthesia, it's already rejecting most of our implants. Elias nodded. Then no cutting until it's strong enough. If that means we wait, we wait. You're attached. He looked at her. Shouldn't I be? She didn't argue. Instead, she set the protein bar on the desk and left. In his quarters, Elias recorded a message for Kelvor. It was short. You were right, it remembers. But not because it's dangerous, because it wants to belong. Then he pulled up the pod logs one last time. In the corner feed, the juvenile Scarth Rend slept curled in the rear of its pod, its breathing steady. He watched for a long time. Not as a scientist. Not as a doctor. As something else. As the last voice they'd trusted, the surgery wasn't optional anymore. By the 4th day aboard the Kestrel, the juvenile Scarth Rend's vitals began to dip not from infection, but from mechanical strain. The malformed forelimb, left broken and improperly healed in captivity, was slowly causing a nerve collapse. If they didn't intervene soon, it wouldn't just lose function, it would lose the creature entirely. Elias stood in the procedure bay, reading the scan with arms crossed tight. Vitals are borderline, Aaron said quietly beside him. Anesthesia will be risky. He nodded once, jaw tight. We've got one window, maybe 2 hours. And if it rejects the implant like the last attempt? We don't go near synthetics this time. Just bone reset, internal brace, regenerative mesh, all organic. Aaron looked doubtful. That tech's slow. So is death, Elias said. But one of them's reversible. She didn't argue. Instead, she turned to prep the suite while Elias stepped away, not to rest, not to review, but to do the one thing the textbooks never trained for. He went to see the patient. The juvenile was awake when he arrived. Still too weak to pace or posture, but not sedated, not docile, just watchful. It lay curled in the corner of the pod, breathing unevenly, one clawed foot twitching every few seconds. Elias didn't bring tools. He just sat, a meter from the glass, and waited. The creature blinked. Elias leaned forward. "We're going to fix your leg," he said. "It'll hurt. You won't understand why it hurts at first, but you'll be okay." The Scarth Wren didn't growl. It didn't lunge. It just watched, the same way it had the first time, not like prey, not like threat, like someone who remembered. Elias pressed his hand lightly to the glass. The creature mirrored him, slower this time, the limbs shaking faintly as it rose to meet the contact point. They stayed like that for 12 seconds. Then the juvenile dropped its head with a low rumble and closed its eyes. The surgery took 2 hours and 43 minutes. They used no sedation at first, only a nerve-blocking field, and localized pulse dampeners to keep the heart rate stable. The Scarth Wren bucked once during incision, but Elias stayed with it the entire time, whispering steady rhythms under his breath, not language, just tone, just familiarity. When the internal brake was reset and the brace anchored, the neural response showed something no one expected. Calm. The vitals held steady until the final stitch. Then the creature whimpered sharp, high, involuntary. Elias flinched, glancing up from the dressing. "That's not pain," Aaron said softly from across the table. "That's fear." He reached for its shoulder slowly, and let his gloved hand rest there as the final scan processed. "It's not angry," he murmured. "It's afraid." Recovery was slow. Realistically, 6 to 8 weeks. No forced movement, no excess stress. They rotated the pod to face a low sunlight viewport, calibrated the nutrition drip to account for metabolic fluctuations, and replaced the restraint brackets with motion-guided padding. No one touched it but Elias. He brought food himself, checked the limbs' mobility himself, sat in the same place each cycle, and spoke even when there was no sign the creature understood. And then, one evening, it moved. Not just a twitch. It stood. Unsteady at first. The repaired leg shook under the weight, but it didn't buckle. The Scarth Wren took one step forward, then another. And then it sat, just like Elias had, weeks ago. Palms open, no threat, no need to show teeth. When Elias placed his hand on the glass again, the creature met it. This time, without hesitation. The message came from Meridian Theta 3 days later. The adult had stopped eating. Not because of illness, not due to sedative overload. It was simply fading, not violently, not distressed, just still. Withdrawn. "None of our behavioral teams can reach it," the tech said over encrypted comms. "We've tried visual cues, pheromone simulations, food triggers. Nothing. We think it's waiting for something." Elias already knew. He looked at Aaron. How fast can the juvenile be cleared for transfer? Aaron's brow creased. "It's barely recovered. But it can walk, and it trusts." She hesitated, then nodded. The transport was quiet. No sedation needed. The young Scarth Wren sat in its stasis pod the whole trip, unmoving but alert. It didn't thrash. It didn't vocalize. It simply stared at Elias the entire time, unblinking, like it knew why they were going. When the shuttle docked, Meridian Theta security teams were already in place. The medtech stood at a distance, watching through mirrored glass as the juvenile's pod was wheeled in. The adult stirred before it even entered the room. Monitors pinged faintly. The massive head turned. A breath hitched. When the door opened and the smaller Scarth Wren stepped into the room under its own power, the vitals spiked not from stress. From recognition, the juvenile froze at the threshold. The adult didn't growl, didn't move. Elias let go of the guidance tether. "Go," he said, quietly. The juvenile stepped forward, 1 step, then 2, then 3. The adult shifted not toward it, but downward, lowering its head until the two met nose to nose. The younger one chuffed once, a short, soft sound. The adult replied with the same. It was the quietest reunion anyone on the station had ever seen. No lunges, no cries, just a slow, low sound between two creatures who had been broken apart and had, somehow, found each other again. In the days that followed, recovery accelerated. Not just for the juvenile, for both. Feeding resumed, movement returned, vitals normalized. The adult, once barely responsive, now stayed alert and oriented. The juvenile moved with increasing confidence, following its larger counterpart closely. Elias was allowed in the chamber on the 3rd day. Both Scarth wrens watched him. Neither moved. Then the adult stepped forward one deliberate movement and pressed its head, gently, to his chest. The juvenile mimicked it. Elias didn't speak. He just stood there, hands at his sides, letting the weight of a bond form not from training, not from force, but from understanding, settle into the space between species. Kelver called in via secure line later that night. "I've never seen anything like this," he said. "It's rewriting everything we thought we knew." Elias just smiled faintly. That's what happens when you stop trying to control everything that scares you. The Scarth wrens weren't kept as specimens. After long debate and longer debriefs, both were relocated to a secure habitat on a research colony built not to contain them but to study what they chose to do when free. They didn't leave each other's side. They didn't hunt. They didn't hide. They lived. Elias visited twice a year. No security escort, no armor, just a man with a familiar voice and a story that had once rewritten fear into care. On his last visit, as he stood near the open fence line, the younger Scarth wren, now grown, stronger, scarred in ways that would never fully heal, came forward. Not to posture. Not to guard. Just to sit beside him, the way it had the first time they met. And in that silence, with nothing between them but memory and breath, Elias understood what most of the galaxy still hadn't. Sometimes, the most dangerous creatures weren't the ones with the sharpest teeth. They were the ones no one had ever spoken gently to.